Oh, anybody who's watching this, welcome to my reaction to the Tube Diver Crushes Himself and Everyone Else Last Moments by Cuxer. I haven't seen Cuxer videos in a while. I just remember that his channel existed, so I thought why not make some more. This video came out like a month ago on June 25th, and because it's a last moments video and I remember them, the one thing I remember from last moments videos is that they're depressing and I'm ready for some sad stuff. So it's an easy choice for me. Probably shouldn't be smiling when it's gonna be about death. I'm already mentally unstable. Who cares? Oops. Anyway, if you want to help out the channel, there's a donation link in the description below. You can also send a recommendation through it, and you can also leave your recommendations in the comments below. So also subscribe for more low energy, low quality, low effort content, whatever low you can put on it. Let's start.
It is approaching 9 AM as a London Underground train reaches the end of the line. However, instead of decelerating into Moorgate Station, the train makes no attempt to stop.
Okay, I want to say that I don't know what tube diver means at all. I for some reason thought of tubes like in plumbing. I don't expect it to begin with trains.
Astonishment of commuters waiting on the platform, the train speeds right past them and crashes horrifically into the overrun tunnel. The front carriages are crushed into the wall by the force of the trailing carriages. The overrun tunnel is now crammed with mangled metal, making the space a nightmare for the following 13 hours of rescue efforts. But an investigation revealed no faults or failures with the train or the track. So, what could have caused this crash? The answer lies with the driver, but as he was located at the very...
He actually looks like a little bit thinner version of me if I shave. Now, especially with long hair. Okay, I never thought about that before.
At the time of the crash, his strange actions that day will forever be a mystery to us.
You choose basic European look. Probably you get something similar to
me. On the 28th of February 1975, 56-year-old motorman Leslie Newson is preparing for a day of driving trains on the Northern Line of the London Underground in the UK. His work begins at 7 AM, driving a 6-carriage train from Drayton Park Station to Moorgate, just 2 miles away. He will make numerous trips throughout the course of his day. By 8:40 AM, he is making the same trip from Drayton Park Station to Moorgate. Around 300 passengers pile on the train. Frequent commuters will aim for the front carriages, as these will be closest to the exits on arrival. Some board the train a little too late for the good seats and find the first carriage completely full. They must settle for the rear carriages. Just 5 minutes later, the train is approaching Moorgate Station, the end of the line. But something is wrong. Normally...
I'm asking if is that a problem because I rode a metro train, whatever you want to call it, like an underground train, maybe twice in my life. Because I don't live in a city where there is one. I did for like a month and a half, and I neither walked, even if it was multiple kilometers, just to enjoy the view, or use a taxi. So I'm not too keen on underground train culture, I don't know.
A train will coast for a while to slow its approach to a station before applying the brakes and entering the station at around 15 miles per hour. Newson's train does not cut the power, nor does it apply the brakes. It enters the station at around 40 miles per hour. Commuters on Moorgate's Platform 9 jump back in fright as the train hurtles into the overrun tunnel, plows through the buffer and sand drag, and slams into the tunnel's end wall. The front carriage is crushed into the wall as the second carriage crashes into the back of it, buckling the carriage and forcing the front and rear into the roof. The 52-foot carriage has been crushed to around 20 feet. The second carriage now crammed under the...
Also, it's February 29th, so that's a rare day to see. I feel like people who were probably annoyed that they couldn't get in the first carriage were maybe quite happy to go in the rear ones, especially the very rear if they went there. Unless nobody survived, even those who weren't in the front and just crashed immediately.
First is crushed when the third carriage telescopes into it. The three carriages behind the third carriage are comparatively unscathed, and some of these passengers are able to leave the station without even realizing the brutal extent of the damage. It is only later, when they see the news, that they discover they have escaped the most deadly peacetime incident in the Underground's history. Unfortunately, there are still dozens of people trapped in the wreckage of the first few carriages. When rescue workers arrive, around 10 minutes after the crash, they discover their conditions are less than enviable. The overrun tunnel is in complete darkness. Soot, dirt and dust kicked up in the crash create a thick dark fog which blackens anything it touches in fine residue. The trains are completely wedged in the tunnel, making maneuvering through the wreck incredibly difficult. This rescue effort is going to be a cramped affair, and it's going to drag on for hours. What the rescue workers find on board the carriages is hell. Some are dead, some are living, some are stuck in between and suffocating in the mass. Many of the survivors have suffered grisly injuries, rendering them unable to move. Many of them are simply trapped in place by the wreckage or the dead.
I feel like in this kind of crash, of course you will want to be unscathed entirely, but if that's not happening, I feel like I'd rather die on the spot, and that's not even talking because I'm depressed and want to die, just I'd rather die on the spot than just suffocate to death in like minutes, if not more. Just agony.
Under the light of their torches, rescue workers find some of the dead still sitting in place, as if they were almost ready to step out the doors and be on their way to work. The workers make their way to survivors, cutting and hacking their way through metal. But as the hours pass by, conditions only worsen. The London Underground can be a hot place to begin with, but with no trains running, forcing air through the tube lines, it's only getting hotter. Torches and cutting equipment are making matters worse, not only heating the tunnel to a sweltering 49 degrees Celsius, but eating up the oxygen in the air, sending oxygen levels from the usual 21% to just 16%. If you were trapped among the bodies, you'd have it even worse. Not to mention the smell from decomposition. One fireman recalled the desperation from those still trapped. In a section of the wreckage too tight for large cutting equipment, Brian Goodfellow uses a hacksaw to cut his way in. As he does so, hands start to grasp at him from the inside. As they pull on him, he drops his torch, plunging the carriage into darkness. Terror-stricken by his predicament, he escapes out of his fire jacket as the hands pull it in with them. He retreats to the platform to recompose himself, then returns to the rescue work.
Can you imagine the mindset you can be in when you go into it and see dead bodies, and then you go further in, like cutting the train apart, and just your mindset fixated on like dead people that could be right in front of you, and just the hands come out from like the darkness? You probably would think like they are trying to drag you to hell. I can't imagine that.
After 6 hours of tireless effort, there are only 2 remaining survivors in the front carriage, pinned down under mangled girders and trapped together. 19-year-old Margaret Lyles is a policewoman, and 27-year-old Jeff Benton works at the London Stock Exchange. Any of Margaret's movements cause Jeff agony, so she tries to keep still. Another 5 hours later, it is concluded that the only way to free the two is by amputating Margaret's left foot. Margaret is put to sleep and operated on by surgeons. Jeff finds himself an involuntary observer. Thankfully, the two are soon free and on their way to hospital.
It's probably a bad it's not even a comparison, but just it reminded me of House MD episode where, what was it, a building collapse and there was a girl underneath the rubble and her leg was stuck, and in the end they had to amputate it and stuff. It's just how my brain works. I'm sorry.
Fortunately, Jeff Benton will die of his injuries a month later. Like many others, he was suffering from crush syndrome, a state of shock induced by compression of skeletal muscle. Around 13 hours after the crash, rescue workers turn off their equipment and call for silence in the tunnel. They call out for survivors, but there is no response. They conclude that the remaining bodies are lifeless. In all, 43 are dead and 74 are injured.
Okay.
So, what caused such a tragedy?
As
I mentioned, there was nothing wrong with the train. The driver
also, can you imagine that you're still alive, but neither some kind of wound or some kind of pressure on you does not allow you to scream in any way, make any noise, you're just wedged into somewhere, but still alive. But because you can't make any noise at all, they just declare you dead. I don't know.
Leslie Newson was the cause. A simple mistake or accident, you may be thinking, but it's a little bizarre. Newson's body was the last to be recovered. His body still at the controls. The 3-foot driver's cab had been crushed to 6 inches. At the time of the crash, the train's engine was still running. The brakes were not applied. Newson had seemingly not made any attempt to stop the train. The dead man's handle was still depressed, suggesting he was not incapacitated either, as the brakes are automatically applied when a human is not actively operating the handle. Examinations of his body concluded that he was in his normal driving position when he died. He did not raise his arms or cower at the sight of the oncoming wall. Witnesses on the platform confirmed that the driver appeared to be staring straight ahead as if nothing were wrong just before the crash.
Was he suicidal?
So, what was he doing? Some suggest Newson was committing suicide and intentionally crashing the train. Earlier that week, the experienced driver had uncharacteristically overshot 2 platforms while stopping. Some think he may have been practicing his suicide in doing this, getting a feel for barreling past his destination. This was deemed unlikely by friends and co-workers. They wouldn't have suspected him as being depressed or suicidal, and even if he was, to include so many people in that suicide with no regard for their lives or safety seems very extreme. Also, Newson had been planning to buy his daughter a car after work that day and was actually carrying the money with him at the time of the crash. A post-mortem revealed Newson's blood alcohol level was above normal. Could he have been intoxicated at the time of the incident? He wasn't described as a heavy drinker, and once again his colleagues didn't notice anything unusual in his behavior that day. It's possible that the alcohol found in his blood may have simply been a product of decomposition. And even if it wasn't, the level of alcohol found in his blood was very unlikely to lead to the level of impairment required to allow such an accident to occur. No other drugs were found in his system. Was his mind simply absent at the time of the crash? Was he distracted or daydreaming? It was found that the change in environment, noise and lighting as a train comes into the station should be more than sufficient to snap someone back to reality. Surely Newson would have at least noticed when the wall was straight ahead of him and thrown his arms out in front of him in reaction. Well, there are also medical conditions that could explain the crash. Was Newson temporarily paralyzed, seized up or blacked out? It seems like the most logical explanation, but we'll never know. There was insufficient evidence to support.
If he was paralyzed or blacked out, he could have probably fallen. And also the automatic brakes. I'm assuming you had to maybe hold the lever or whatever there is in place in order to not activate the automatic brakes to make them. I can use it. I can So they won't work, is what I'm trying to say.
This theory. Officially, the blame for the accident was placed solely on Leslie Newson. However, it was simply ruled an accident. Officials were unable to say for sure why he acted as he did. Since then, some changes have been made to prevent similar accidents.
Okay, before that happens, I guess even if you do blame solely him, like, so then what? He's already dead. He can't pay for his crime if he committed that, and like there's no rhyme or reason to do so. Just in my opinion, I don't know.
The tunnel wall at the end of Moorgate's Platform 9 was painted white to make it more visible. A speed limit of 10 miles per hour was imposed for all trains entering terminal platforms, and train stop equipment was installed that automatically applies a train's emergency brakes if it attempts to pass above a certain speed. This system was operational all across the underground by 1984.
Good. When he started explaining things like a white wall, that in the situation that happened, that wouldn't help. A limit of 10 miles, I guess, instead of 15, if I remember correctly, that also doesn't really help because he was not stopping. That wasn't the problem. He went over the speed limit or something just for the hell of it. But this makes much more sense.
As it stands, that's all there is to the story, and it seems likely there'll forever be a missing piece to the Moorgate puzzle. What's certain is the immense tragedy and unimaginable horror of the crash. Those who worked to rescue victims are beyond commendable. Not only did they subject themselves to intensely physically grueling conditions, but also probably to lasting psychological trauma too. What they experienced in that tunnel is the stuff of nightmares. In some ways you could say that they were victims too.
I agree, but
the front carriage.
Okay. But when they went into that line of work, I feel like they would have expected that. Maybe somebody from their crew even was in a similar situation, not with a train or anything like that, but seeing just dead bodies or even maybe disfigured bodies. So, and when you go into that kind of work, I feel like you would expect something like that. You would know. So, for that kind of work, your psychological profile or something like that would be higher than just a regular human. Higher. It's not a stat. Just you'll be less affected by it than just a regular human who would have came into the same situation.
It was an indescribable tangle of twisted metal, and in it the living and the dead were heaped together, intertwined among themselves and the wreckage. It was impossible to estimate the number of people involved with any degree of accuracy because the lighting was poor, the victims were all tangled together, and everything was covered with a thick layer of black dust. Many of the victims were writhing in agony and were screaming for individual attention. It was obvious from an early stage that the main problem was the disentanglement of a heap of people, many of whom appeared to be in imminent danger of suffocation.
That's a terrifying situation. And I will need another long break before I can watch another Cukesir Last Moments video. He has 13 of them? I did watch that one, by the way. How do you die in a sinking submarine? Or something similar with the people died in some... Anyway. Besides the point. Did he not give 500k? He did. Switch the fucking picture. Anyway. This was a very sad situation for everybody involved. Even for people not involved. Different degree, but still. I have nothing else to say, and just thank you anybody who watched this. I appreciate it a lot, and I hope to see you next time. Subscribe so you'll be here for next time. I don't know. Goodbye. Have a great life. because one of us has to.